Boring vignette.
The more you know who you are and what you want, the less you let things upset you.
After boring vignette.
But the good news is the whiskey works.
After weird cultural misrepresentation vignette.
カットカットカットカットカット本当に分かってんなんだとぼけちゃってこれはサントリーの響きだよ高いんだからサントリーの中で一番
After bizarre vignette.
Mr. Harris! Oh my God! Don't touch me! Mr. Bob Harris! Don't touch me! Just leave me starting!
Okay, folks, I've got a rule when I sit down to do a movie review, to watch a movie, to do a movie review, and that is I'm going to stick with that movie all the way through, no matter how boring it is, no matter how bad it is, because sometimes it can just be bad to talk about bad. And this movie is bad. It is a 1 popcorn out of 10 popcorns movie. Yes, it is desultory. It is just so horrible that I'll get into it. Okay, my rule is, as you know, if you've been watching me, is I do a review of the movie without any plot spoilers. I'll do that first, and then I'm going to dive into this movie and dig in and find out what makes this movie so horrible. And I will have plot spoilers. Then I'll let you know before that happens. But this is a movie about two Americans who are experiencing ennui. They don't know who they are. Their lives are not happy, and they are at a bad place. And are they going to move on to the next place in their lives? Are they going to translate? Are they lost in translation between where they were, what they are, and what they're going to be? Thus the title of the movie. Of course, the secondary aspect of that movie is there are two Americans who are in Tokyo. They've decided to go to Tokyo. The older one, the older gentleman, around 50 years old, Bob, played nicely by Bill Murray. And the younger one is Charlotte. She's around 23, just graduated from college. And she's played by Scarlett Johansson. She also does a good job. Their acting is fine in this, but the script is so horrible that there's not very much they could do. But so, they're in Japan for different reasons, and they meet up at a hotel. And so this movie is about the scenes mostly of them meeting up and having really boring conversations, cliche conversations, no exploration into why they are in this ennui state, in this sort of desperation state, this I have no place to go in life state. Where I'm at right now is not a happy place. And the movie explains briefly about why they're both in that, or why he is in that unhappy state. She never really gets into that. But then one of the bizarre aspects of this is just a really bizarre scene with a hooker, a Japanese hooker, that makes no sense, and it's cringeworthy. The misrepresentations of the Japanese culture by the writer-director on this, Sofia Coppola, are tone deaf at the very best. And potentially racist. She's probably not a racist, but her stereotyping of the Japanese culture in this is just supremely unsettling. I found myself several times in this movie being embarrassed as an American watching this, as if the rest of the world it's going to institute and confirm the stereotype that Americans are just jingoists, cardboard jingoists who can't get into other cultures and stereotype those other cultures. That's what you get from that aspect of this movie. Yeah, it's that bad, my friends. So is this a romantic movie? because some people call it that. Is it not a romantic movie? Are these two people just commiserating with where they are in their life? Are they trying to be friends with each other? Well, I'm not going to give any of that away. All I'm going to say, excuse me, I got some allergies. All I'm going to say is that the director, Sofia Coppola, does a supremely bad job of translating this to us, the viewers. There's no diving into the personalities of these two people. You would think that a guy, this 50-year-old gentleman who's famous in Japan for being a movie star in America, and he's come to Japan to pitch a whiskey, Santori whiskey, for them. And that's in the trailer, so I'm not giving anything away. And you would think that a guy who's been through that much would have it would be a little bit jaded and would have a lot of wit, sarcasm, etc. Well, you just don't get that. The writer, Sofia Coppola, on this just doesn't understand the character or just doesn't want to explore it. And the same thing with Charlotte, the graduate student who graduated from college. She's the same way. There's just no exploration into the degree that she got into college. Why she would get that particular degree, I'm not going to tell you what that was. I don't want to give it away, but it's an interesting degree that she got, and that doesn't get explored at all by Bob. And she doesn't really explore him. So there could be a lot of drama and antagonism in this movie between those two characters who are about 27 years apart. And so you're kind of wondering, especially the way this movie starts, and I'm not going to give it away, but it is a very bizarre beginning to this movie, the very first scene. You're thinking this is going to be some sort of sexual drama, and it isn't. So anyway, that said, if you want to watch a couple of people who are really boring and are sort of being boring together, well, then watch this movie. That's what I'll tell you. Because you're not going to be satisfied. And the ending on this is, again, out of place, incongruous. It doesn't work. It's what the Greeks would call deus ex machina, God from the machine. It's coming in and trying to plaster a resolution on this where there's been no leading up to the resolution of it. So yeah, that's my general overview of Lost in Translation. Obviously, I forgot to mention, obviously the Lost in Translation also has to do with the fact that they don't speak Japanese and they're in Tokyo. And so they're not understanding the language. So Coppola did it this way to enhance the sort of alienation that they're feeling with their own lives. And that also doesn't work. Wow. Okay, so that's the general overview. So let's dive into this movie, shall we?
All the gin joints and...
Too busy living.
I watched Sea Beams.
I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse.
So let's take a look at my 8 categories for great movie making and just kind of look at them real quick before we go into a lot of the specifics on this movie. The story is, the idea for the story is not bad. You got a couple of people who are in a state of stagnation. They're lost. They're not translating from one way of being in life to another way of being in life. So they're lost in translation. They're desultory. They find themselves boring, or they are bored. So that can be a difficult thing to do. They're in a culture that is alien to themselves. So it's more profound, the whole sort of alienation of themselves. So that idea is good, but that's going to be hard to accomplish unless you can give a lot of character to the characters. And Sofia Coppola does not do this. The writing is just horrible on this. It's sort of tone deaf, not just to the Japanese culture, but to what would these people act like? What would a 50-ish year old guy who's done a lot of movies in America and has taken a $2 million payout to do a quick commercial on a Japanese whiskey? You know, what would he be like? And that's a bit cynical, it turns out, because he's not really into it. So he's just taking the payout. So what would that guy be like? I mean, to me, he would be jaded, you know? He's done with all that stuff. And as we know, as we learn, he's alienated from his wife. Doesn't really care too much about his children's birthday or child's birthday or whatever it is.
Taking a break from my wife, forgetting my son's birthday.
So he's just at a place. He's at a sticking place, you know? But there would be wit there. He would have some kind of jaded wit, some kind of cynical wit. You know, sort of like Bill Murphy's character in Groundhog Day. The way they made that guy, he was a narcissist. The way they made that narcissist interesting was to give him a great insight into the people around him, and he said things he wasn't supposed to say.
I don't suppose there's any possibility of getting an espresso or a cappuccino this morning, is there?
Oh, I really don't know.
How to spell espresso cappuccino?
It made it interesting. It made him interesting. Because narcissists are not interesting people. But that's the way they did it. But this movie, Sofia Coppola does not attempt to do that with this movie, with Bob. So Bob just comes across as boring. He never really says anything interesting or funny in this movie. How is that even possible? And the same goes for Charlotte. So Charlotte is a graduate of philosophy, a bachelor's degree in philosophy. She's probably around 23, previous spring. And that is a bizarre education choice. It is. I actually thought about doing it at one point myself, but not too many people become philosophy students. That's not their degree plan. You have to have a certain persona that wants to dive into the whys and wherefores and whats of life. What does it mean to be human, existence, etc., to want to pursue that to any length. And so that could be an interesting character. But she's not. We get no philosophical insights from her. We get that cliched response, insulting response about him being in a midlife crisis.
You're probably just having a midlife crisis.
But then we get his response. He doesn't get upset with this.
Did you buy a Porsche yet?
You know, I was thinking about buying a Porsche.
At her spouting that cliche, easily spouting that cliche. You know, he doesn't come back with, oh, so that's what they taught you in philosophy class? How about, I drink, therefore I am? Where she perhaps could come back with, I don't think Descartes would mind that particular phrasing. You know, something interesting, something witty, you know, to give us some insight into these people. But she addresses him directly when they first meet. But then she has these little girl giggles. That are incongruous and annoying, frankly. She's annoying. In that first scene where they meet, she's annoying. And he is just absolutely boring. And the dialogue is just horrible. I'll get back to that in a little bit. And talk about what possibly could have been said to give more breadth to their characters. But so you got bad characters. If you're going to have two people who have ennui in an alienated place and they're lost in translation, you're going to have to sprite up the dialogue and give us great insight in these characters, which will also create something this movie doesn't have, and that is drama. You need some drama in this movie. And the drama has got to come with them trying to find themselves, trying to translate to a new me. You know? And the two characters call each other out on that. That's what I thought was going to happen with this movie. You got the young woman who is full of life energy, got most of her life ahead of her. She's going to call him out on his desultory nature. He's going to call her out on being contradictory. You act like a little girl, and yet you have a philosophy degree, you know? Because it's our self-deception a lot of times that causes us to be desultory, to have that ennui, to get to a stagnation place. So this movie could have done that, but it doesn't. So it's got bad writing, bad characters, no drama, and the pacing is just simply deplorable on this. You've got long scenes where nothing really happens, where they're sitting in that restaurant.
Well, she is closer to your age.
After he's had sex with that lounge singer lady, you know, which, by the way, is the only sexual aspect of this entire movie. And yet, how does this movie begin? Seriously, folks, this is bizarre. The movie begins, as you probably know if you've seen it. Well, I'm talking to you as if you've seen it because you don't care about the plot spoilers. The movie begins with over 30 second shot of Charlotte's rear end in transparent panties on a bed. Yeah. And so when I watch the movie, I'm like, what is this going to be? Some sort of sexploitation? Is this going to be a sexual comedy? What is this going to, or just about sex and romance, or what is this going to be? Well, it turns out this movie is platonic, isn't it? It's not about romance. It's not about him even falling for her or her falling for him. If you watch the scenes over and over, even during the karaoke setting, they're not falling for each other.
Gonna use my arms, gonna use my legs.
That's cute. Oh, hey, So after I watched this movie and remembering that first scene, I'm like, what the hell was that first 30 seconds about on her butt? Where you're staring at her butt crack, folks. What the hell is that? So I decided to look it up. I got to know if Coppola ever explained that. And she actually does. Pardon me. What she says, I don't have a really good reason for it. Yeah. Does that surprise you? She doesn't have a good reason for anything in this movie. She won a freaking Oscar for the screenplay on this. Goodness gracious. She says, that scene, it's just how I wanted to start the movie. I liked having a hint of the character. Oh, really? How about a hint of the butt crack? How do you get a hint of the character in her panties? Right there, lying on her side, not facing the camera. And then she goes on to say, a hint of her character, a sweet young girl waiting around in her hotel room, and then go into the story. A sweet young girl waiting around in her hotel room? That's a sexual shot. Nothing in that shot reeks of sweetness. It reeks of sexuality, of nakedness, of butt crackness. Oh my God, how clueless is Sofia Coppola? Are you kidding me? And it would be one thing if the movie goes on to have a sexual nature between Bob and Charlotte. I guess that's still bizarre, that opening scene. But it doesn't. And let me just go ahead and skip to the end on this real quick. Now that we're talking about sexuality or romance or anything else. This movie has no sexuality in it. The one scene where there evidently was sex was between Bob and the lounge singer lady. And that is just insinuated. That's it. And then Bob and Charlotte show no romantic attraction to each other in this movie. None. Zero. Zilch. Nada. But Bob all of a sudden jumps out of the taxi cab while he's going to the airport when he sees her walking down the road. and he's got some sort of epiphany that we have no reason to know why he would have such an epiphany. And I'm thinking to myself when I see that, I'm like, oh, he's going to jump out and say, oh, I really wanted to just say, I'm so glad to have spent this time with you. Actually, being with you helped me realize that I need to snap out of this bullshit state that I'm in, this stagnation that I'm in, And maybe they kiss each other on the cheek just real briefly, because it's been platonic. But no, you get a freaking long romantic kiss. This is the Deus Ex Machina I was talking about a while ago, God from the machine. This is where you're trying to wrap up junk with a false ending. Because this was not telegraphed. This was not foreshadowed. And what, are we supposed to connect to that? Are we supposed to feel good about that? No, it was cringeworthy. And then she gets teary-eyed. He walks backwards, smiling at her. Oh, gooey, 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 gooey gumdrops. What? No, it doesn't fit. It's just so ridiculous. Oh my God, are you kidding me? I mean, it's Sofia Coppola doing bad writing and then trying to wrap everything up with a pretense. That's what this is. So as I said, the only way to make this movie interesting is you've got to have the characters be interesting. You've got to create the drama, and the only way the drama can be created is through banter. Each one of these people is probably hiding something from themselves about why they're in this desultory state. And so the banter can be about the other one seeing through the veneer. Each cannot see their own deception, but they can see the other person's deception. And they're probably in a place where they don't really want to be around. They don't want to open up to anybody else. They're not in that kind of place. So the first time they meet each other in the bar, at the bar, is she walks up. She seems to be a little bit intrigued. Okay, let's give her that. This guy seems like, he'll be frank or different from her husband, who is shallow and flighty. So they're not going to open up with each other. But you're going to have to create dialogue that starts to explore the deception, starts to explore what's going on. Like if two miserable people are going to see the misery in the other person. And maybe that's why Charlotte goes up to him, if she sees a person in equal gloom, But then what Coppola has to do is give scintillating dialogue here, showing the deception, showing the exploration. Charlotte's a philosophy student. Maybe she's going to dig in and find out why this guy, who is this guy? Why does he seem to be gloomy? What's he doing at the bar by himself? And then he is going to be intrigued by her youthfulness and vivacity, but being a philosophy student, and also she seems to be equally gloomy. What's up with that? But we don't get exploration. Here's what we get. Here's the stuff that we get in this scene. So after he does that funny thing where he says, make it Santori time, and the waiter says, mimics him, says it at the same time, that would, to me, that would be very curious if I'm her. I'm like, what the hell is up with that? Is there some inside thing that I don't know about?
For relaxing times, make it Santori
time.
I'll have a vodka tonic. Thanks.
But she just goes, I'll take a vodka tonic. Basically slapping him in the face, but okay, whatever. But why doesn't she ask, what's up with that? What was that whole thing about? Because wouldn't any person do that? But they just move on. It's like, it's yet again how Coppola just throws in vignettes, could take it someplace, but doesn't. She says, what's up with that? How did you and the waiter both know that? And then he says why he's there. And she's like, oh, you're famous. Why don't I know you? Or whatever, but get into that. So after she asks, what are you doing here? Which is kind of a weird way to put it, So what's up with you? That's a weird way to put that. This never really ever, I don't think I've ever heard anybody put it that way. But anyway, it's stilted dialogue from Coppola yet again. But then he goes in, he gets heavy. I mean, my God. I mean, he's there to get away from his wife, forget his child's birthday, to get paid $2 million to endorse a whiskey when he should be doing a play, getting on with his life, translating his life. That's heavy. And what does she say?
Oh.
Oh. Oh. Oh. Really? I mean, she's a philosophy student. This is huge. This is existential. Why doesn't she come back with something like that? Why doesn't she say, damn, that's heavy. I was just expecting you to say you were on a business trip. Wow. Some sort of connection. Some sort of connection. But with this movie, there hardly is ever any kind of connection. Like true dialogue between two people who are in a particular place in their lives.
But the good news is the whiskey works.
The good news is the whiskey works, okay? And then we get another one of her silly little giggles and smiles,
But the good news is the whiskey works.
I would expect a philosophy student to have more gravity. Now, if Coppola is trying to show that she's still a little girl inside, well, that's going to make things pretty cringeworthy as this thing goes on because he's, 27 years older than her? Different generation? It just starts to get a little bit sort of, when she starts doing her little nervous giggles in this, it's like she becomes less interesting to me. Why didn't Coppola give her more gravity? Like serious, penetrating evaluation, philosophical evaluation of Bob. That would be interesting. But she doesn't turn that evaluation on herself. So Bob has to do it. Bob looks at the contradictions. Yeah, so she's a philosophy student. She's there with her husband, and they got some friends there, though I don't think we ever see the friends. That's a little bit weird. But and then she's been married for 2 years. And by the way, she was 17 years old when she made this movie, when they did the filming on this movie. And she does look really young, which also adds a little bit to the sort of cringeworthiness of this because she doesn't act even 23, really. It'd be one thing if she had the gravitas of a 30-year-old, even though she's 23. I've known some people in their early 20s who had that kind of gravitas, but Coppola doesn't give her that. So it accentuates the age gap. But he comes back with 25 long ones on how long he's been married. 25 long ones, really.
25 long ones.
Wow. Again, that's heavy. He doesn't say 25 years, like a lot of people would. 25 long ones. And she goes, oh. Oh? I mean, where the hell is Coppola on this? Where the hell is the writing on this? She doesn't say long ones, all of them, or just most recently. I mean, it must have been good in the beginning, right? Aren't they all good in the beginning? So he's doing a disservice to his marriage because no marriage starts out with long years, do they? I mean, I've never known one. First 2 or 3 or 4 are pretty damn amazing. So she doesn't call him on the contradiction. She's a goddamn philosophy student. She's meant to see the contradictions. She's been trained to see the contradictions. But Coppola doesn't dive into her character. It's just bizarre. You're probably having a midlife crisis. Really? Who on first seeing somebody says that and says it so blithely?
You're probably just having a midlife crisis.
It's so insensitive. Yeah, I know later she says she's mean, but I'm not sure it really refers to this. She's not trying to be mean here. She's being cute. So she comes out with a cliche. Probably suffering from a midlife crisis. Really? Oh my God. And then, have you bought a Porsche? I was thinking about buying a Porsche. Really? That's a line? You think that's funny? That's not funny. I was thinking about buying a Porsche. How about something like, oh, I've got 5 muscle cars I'm working on. You know, where he throws it back at her. You know, that would be funny. That would be witty. That would be coming from a guy who's been around the block 6 times. We don't get that with him. You know, again, it's like Coppola just doesn't understand her characters.
In 25 years. It's impressive.
Oh, in 25 years? Oh, well, that's impressive. Really? Who says that? Obviously, she's using impressive as a pseudonym for that's a really long time. What she really should have said, and what would have added some tension to this movie, is that's 2 years longer than I've been alive. How about that? How about that? And that would give him a chance to understand the implications of this little interaction. That's how old he is. And it would really solidify his age and the age difference here, and allow the banter to go about with that understanding. You know, and then he could quip back with something. I don't know. Something cynical like, yeah, well, the relationship started going downhill about the time you were born. Which would mean obviously after 2 years, you know? Something. And now you start digging in. Wow, really? It's been going downhill for 23 years. Now you can start getting a sense of why he is getting away from his wife. You know? That would be good storytelling. That lets us dive into get some meat in the character. Again, the little girl giggle. Yeah, annoying. I don't know if Coppola told Scarlett Johansson to do that. If she did, I have no idea why, or if Scarlett just automatically did that. I would imagine that Coppola had her giggle like a little girl. But this whole that what he said right there just doesn't ring. You know, he's trying. It's him attempting to be witty instead of naturally being witty. And then that whole line, "You're just a teenager at marriage. You can drive it, but there's the occasional accident." I just don't really. I still really can't wrap my head around that. You know, I guess that's a metaphor for it, but it's just not a good one. You know? But if you're going to go with that metaphor, why not allow her to respond instead of giggle? Isn't she in her own accident right now? Can't she come back and say, yeah, well, I guess I'm in one of those accidents right now at the 2-year mark. And then this would go back to him if he had said earlier about his starting at year 2. Now you've got a connection. You know? And now you can dive into just the emotion. Have them act this out. Have the emotional expression that comes from reliving all of that, thinking about it. Now you've got 2 people who are in a desperation state, but now they're having to emotionally express it and to intellectually express it, which this movie doesn't do. So what do you do? Philosophy. Oh, there's a buck in that racket. Well, so far I'm working pro bono, not getting paid. And then he says,
Well, I'm sure you'll figure out the angles.
Yeah.
figure out all the angles? What angles? What? That's just such a bizarre thing to say. I'm sure you'll figure out all the angles. And she's working pro bono. What is she giving advice, philosophical advice for free? That just doesn't make sense. It's just bad writing again. You know, I mean, why doesn't he say maybe anything else? Something like, well, you can use your philosophy degree to become a psychologist, and then you can help me figure out where the hell I went off the rails. You know, some candid aspects. Give a candid aspect to their personalities within, because I mean they're in a place where they really probably just don't give a shit what anybody else is going to think about them because they're in such misery. I've had family members, friends, and acquaintances be at that place, and they actually in many cases become interesting in the sense that they will say anything that's on their mind because they just don't care. Like an old person, you know, old family members, you know, at family reunions, you love being around them because they'll say anything. And they say exactly what's on their mind, unlike everybody else who's steeped in the politic. Like my grandma, who was a blast to be around at grocery stores and restaurants, who would comment on the way people walked and their clothing and their mannerisms. It was hilarious. So why can't Coppola have these people do that? Be in such a state that they will say anything that's on their mind. They will divulge their misery or what they think about the other person in a split second and not give a second thought about it. But you can still relate to their misery.
I hope your Porsche works out. Cheers to that.
I hope your Porsche works out. He just said he was thinking about buying a Porsche. He didn't say he was going to buy a Porsche. So that's a vapid thing to say. Coppola she should never write scripts. Why doesn't she say something more interesting like, what are you going to do with that $2 million? My God, that's a lot of money. $2 million. What are you going to do with that? And that gives him a chance to quip. You know? I don't know. Buy a new marriage. You know? Or say something that he shouldn't say. Like, you ever been to the Bahamas? You know? Even if whether he means it or not. You know? That adds a little bit of a sexual tone to it. Then he backs off. Whatever. But frankly, in a situation like this, most guys that age with an attractive 23-year-old would have that on their brain. One of the bizarre aspects of this movie is that he doesn't ever seem to have that on his brain. There's not even a hint of it. Coppola has made this movie entirely platonic. Unbelievably so. In every scene that they're together, even the karaoke scene, which goes on forever. The pacing on this movie is horrible. That sort of wild night and karaoke thing, that whole segment lasts for 7 goddamn minutes. The karaoke itself for about 4 minutes. Why? I mean, it's bad karaoke, like almost all karaoke is. He doesn't have much energy in his performances. She does Brass in Pocket by the Pretenders, and I have to say, it's probably the worst rendition. I've seen at least a half a dozen renditions by women and one guy on Brass in Pocket, and all of them were hilarious. Overly sexualized. Dun, 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 dun. But her voice is monotone.
Me.
And she's not very sexual. You know? And he's just looking at her like, oh, that's so cute. You're just being so cute. You know? There's no desire. That's a desire song. It's one of my favorite songs of all time. And he's showing no desire. She's showing no desire. So that confirms that this is not a sexual relationship. And then, as if to confirm their misery, there's that scene right there after their karaoke where they're in a hallway together and he is positively miserable. So the karaoke didn't bring him up one bit. So then you got to wonder, what was the karaoke scene about? I mean, could they not have at least a partial high after that? He looks miserable. She looks sort of blithe. It's like the misery hasn't really set in with her, like she's not acknowledging it. And that would be a good thing for him to go after. She is miserable in her relationship. It was quite obvious that she has married beneath herself, or he's married beneath himself. I'm not sure which one it is. There's a little continuity problem with that scene also, where it shows when there's a long angle showing her sitting down, she's inside the sort of pyramid of the painting behind her, and then when they shoot a straight on, she's not in the pyramid anymore. That should have been caught by Sofia Coppola. All right, so now I just want to get into that bizarre scene that I talked about at the very beginning. It's obviously the one with the prostitute who comes in, probably, I think, sent there by the director to satisfy the American, famous American. It is so cringeworthy. I just have a really difficult time even putting the bizarreness of it into perspective, and the insult and towards the Japanese. I'm not sure what Coppola was trying to get across with a woman coming in, and that whole them not being able to pronounce the R's. They replace the R's with an L.
Hey, lip my stocking.
Hey, lip them. What?
Lip them like this.
Although my experience has been mostly they replace it with a W instead of the L, but whatever. Let's just say it's an L. And I guess it's supposed to be, she thinks it's supposed to be funny. I really don't know. I'm not sure what this scene is supposed to convey to us, the audience. After the whole lip thing and rip, and no, it's not rip, or it is rip, and then but when he starts to do that, she goes and falls on her back and starts throwing her legs into the air like he's supposed to, I guess, ravish her.
Mr. Harris, oh my God, don't touch me. Mr. Bob Harris, don't touch me. Just lip my stocking.
Is that Sofia Coppola telling us that's how Japanese women or prostitutes get their men, is by pretending to be a victim of who needs to be ravished? I mean, that's what I got from it, And the thing that if you are going to go there with that, Sofia Coppola, if you're going to do that, if you're going to have this kind of bizarre expression of a Japanese prostitute, then give us some humor on his side, where he's got that aplomb, where he knows what's going on. It's quite clear to him, and he says something funny. I don't know what it would be. Maybe something like when she goes on her back, maybe he says something like, what is that, like the cockroach dance, with her legs up in the air and she's on her back. I don't know. And, and as he's going off, pulling his leg out, maybe something like, I'm sorry, gentlemen prefer blondes, or something, just something. It doesn't have to be that, just something witty where he's got control of the situation. He knows what's going on. And we at least get a grasp that this guy has got some personality. Instead, the way he handles it is just like almost like a buffoon who's caught in a storm, A guy who's been around the block like this guy, he would not act that way. So again, it's tone deaf by Coppola. It just doesn't work. And it ends up really insulting the Japanese culture. I just don't know any other way to put that. It just is. I mean, if you had Japanese directors who came over to America and showed American prostitutes doing that, mispronouncing the Japanese language and then falling on their back and acting like a cockroach. I mean, really? Or whatever they did. I mean, that Americans would look at that and be like, what the hell what are you doing? Who do you think we are? Yeah. So talking about pacing for a minute, as I've already said, the karaoke scene went on way too long, and that whole thing where they're running through the arcades and everything else just looks hokey and made up. And the directing on the karaoke scene where the camera looks like a handheld and you're actually the participants is jittery and just sort of discombobulating. It just doesn't work. It's too dark. A bunch of other problems with it. Bad directing. And then as far as pacing goes, on just another scene as an example, it's when Charlotte's alone in Tokyo. She goes through the gardens. Extraordinary scenery. One reason I use the word vignette at the beginning is it just seems like one of the aspects of this movie is Coppola just trying to give us vignettes about Japan. And this is one of the finer vignettes, but it goes on for a desultory 4 minutes, folks. Yeah, her just walking along. Why? I mean, what are we getting here? And then close to the middle, you finally get maybe what it's about, and that is Charlotte sees the couple who are about to get married and sees the look on the Japanese bride's face, and it's a sweet look. And then they hold hands very gently. It's the hope of great marriage and of love, and she doesn't have that. So that could be poignant, but you don't get a poignant look on Charlotte's face. I mean, it's not bad acting. There's a little bit of poignancy there on her face, but for longing for what this Japanese woman is about to have or does have with her love of that man, and the Japanese woman's face is just simply gorgeous and lovely. But you don't get like some subtlety in the acting on this, like maybe like a slight wince or like kind of looking off and then looking back. You know what I mean? Like a little bit more depth. Instead, there's still just a little bit of that blitheness in her character. So there's just which keeps us from having the internal drama expressed on her face. So what you end up having on that scene instead is 4 minutes of basically wandering around, and then you've got about 20 seconds of connection there on what evidently Coppola is trying to get across. So the pacing, again, is just wretched. Wow. Okay, and yet another scene that just clunks on this that could have been full of humor and showing us more of Bob's character is the whole Santori scene with the director and the translator and Bob, of course, being the famous American actor, getting paid $2 million to promote Santori. And again, I don't know if Coppola is just trying to be funny and she's just not. You've got the Japanese director. By the way, almost all of the Japanese in this movie are characterized. They don't come across as real people, including the so-called, the sort of guy who's sort of the Japanese Johnny Carson, bringing him on and his antics and everything. I mean, seriously, folks. But anyway, the Santori scene, you've got the director talking for 20 seconds, talking to Bob. He knows Bob can't understand him.
わかりますね。感情を込めてゆっくりとカメラを見て優しく、そしてあなたの古い友達に会うように。
And we're not getting any subscript on this, subtitles on this, so we have no idea what he's saying. So after a while, I mean, 15 seconds into this, I'm just like, what the hell? I mean, are they ever going to give us subtitles on this? What's going on? What's the denouement on this? And the denouement is that we're not supposed to know. And then she walks up and just says, look into the camera.
He wants you to turn, look in camera.
And Bob, of course, says, you know, is that all he said? Really? Really? I mean, Bob doesn't have a good quip here. I mean, that's just, if I'm Bob, I'm like, oh, I just got to have some fun with this. That's all she's going to translate? That's all he said? I mean, why couldn't Bob come up with a one-liner here? You know, I mean, he's at the end of his rope anyway. So why not say something like, does that guy ever breathe? Or was that all one word? You know, putting everything in one word like the Germans? You know, no wonder you guys joined them during the war. You know, that would be a nasty thing to say, but he doesn't care. He's getting paid. He's going to get paid $2 million no matter how much he insults anybody. It'd be good to see some fire in his belly. You know, a guy like this who is sort of completely down and out, he's just not going to care what he says. And I would have loved to have seen that instead of him on this ennui way he is and just like, oh, okay, this is what I've got to do right here and everything else. I guess that's what Coppola is trying to get across. Well, it's not interesting. Then, of course, yeah, he says, you know, turn from the right or turn from the left. There's only one way for him to turn. He can only turn right towards the camera. So during the movie, I actually backed it up.
All right, did you want me to turn from the right or turn from the left?
Because I'm like, well, why would he say that? So, and then of course, the woman goes on and takes forever to translate that. So again, I get it's some sort of joke, maybe, that the Japanese take forever to say compact things. Is that an insult? Or it's supposed to be funny again? I mean, I just don't get it. It's so clunky. It's so tone deaf. It's so borderline cultural stereotyping or worse, racist. It's unnerving to watch this, along with boring. So yet again, we have the same thing. Yeah, he said, is that everything? It seemed like he said a lot more than that. Come on, the guy, I mean, that's the best line that Coppola can give him. I mean, at this point, he's going to be exasperated. He's going to say something goddamn funny, man. I mean, I was sitting there waiting for it. Just waiting for it. Not because he's Bill Murray, but because any American actor who's been through the fire with a dozen directors, he would have something to say at this guy. And also, that director, being so animated as he was, again, it's a characterization by Coppola. I mean, just, it's overdone. I mean, they're shooting a damn commercial on whiskey. The director's just going to say, look towards the camera. Bob's going to go through the motions. If the director goes off, Bob's going to go off. That's the way this would work. So this whole scene is contrived. That's the way it comes across. Yeah, so after the director says, "Kato, kato, kato, kato," I'm not sure that they say that kind of thing. That almost seemed like it was contrived as well.
Kato, 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 kato.
But then he comes over, and the way he talks to Bob, who is famous in Japan.
サントリーの響きだよ。高いんだからサントリーの中で一番。もうもっと高級な気持ちで、ね?
Knowing the Japanese culture somewhat, this director would be deferential towards him. He wouldn't come over and get in his face and talk down to him. Again, it's just tone deaf. This whole thing's tone deaf. It's like Coppola's trying to create a contrast, a foil. The director is an animated foil of Bob's desultory ennui nature, his just complete not caring about anything. That it's supposed to be a foil character type of thing. And it just doesn't work. It's embarrassing to watch. So diving one more time into Charlotte's lack of personality in this movie and responding to things, you've got the whole sort of Ditzy Kelly one, the evidently famous American actress who's there in Tokyo, and she knows Charlotte's husband, played by Giovanni Ribisi. His name is John, and then Kelly is played by Anna Faris. Both of them do a passing job in their acting. I think actually Anna does a pretty good job doing the sort of ditzy, over the top American actress. But it's too much. And that whole scene with her and John and Charlotte, where she and John, Kelly and John see each other, and John had done photography for her before, and she's just nuts about his photography. But that whole scene obviously is set up so that we can watch Charlotte's reaction to those two, and the fact that those two are animated with each other when John is not animated with her. So it's accentuated, but it's over the top acting by both of them, again, by Coppola. We can't just have a couple of people who are glad to see each other, enjoyed working with each other, compliment each other. It's got to be just this sort of embellished characters. And then, of course, Charlotte says that thing about Evelyn Waugh.
What?
Evelyn Waugh was a man.
Oh, come on, she's nice. What? Not, not everybody went to Yale.
After Kelly says that she's under the name Evelyn Waugh, Evelyn Waugh, famous writer, male writer, and then Kelly thinking because of Evelyn is the first name, it must be a woman. And so Charlotte, being educated like she is, waits for Kelly to walk off before she says anything, which is cowardly. Why not say it right then? That would have made for some good drama, right? I mean, Kelly says, I'm under the name Evelyn Waugh, so nobody will know. And then Charlotte says, but that's a guy. And Kelly says, what? And Charlotte would say, that's a guy. Evelyn Waugh is a male writer, a famous male writer. And then Kelly's like, no, I mean, it's Evelyn. That's her name. Don't you know that? And then Charlotte would get a little smirk on her face. And then that creates more drama when John calls her on it afterwards, instead of them having that sort of superficial exchange where, again, Charlotte just sort of has this sort of ennui, blithe response. But it's like Coppola never understands in this movie how to create drama. And Charlotte, by this time, Charlotte had already said to Bob that he was probably in a midlife crisis. So she has no problem being frank and even possibly insulting somebody. So why wouldn't she do it here? Especially with somebody who's showing so much adulation about her husband. So it just comes across as cowardly and sort of backbiting and gossipy. And so you don't really I didn't really, even though she's right to call her on her ignorance, calling Kelly on her ignorance, still, a lot of people, I would imagine most people don't know that Evelyn Waugh is a guy. So for a movie that's sort of set up to have some comical aspects to it that just don't ring true over and over and over. There is one scene in this movie that's actually funny. It's the hospital scene. It's in the trailer, but it's the interaction in the waiting room between Bob and the elderly Japanese lady, where she's talking to him and he's trying to figure out what she's saying, and then they've got that really funny ending.
How's that song go?
I just love that. That's the one time in this movie where you really, really like Bob. And the elderly Japanese lady is just adorable. So my hat's off to Coppola on the handling of that scene. Why though? Why? I'm not really sure. Because Bob just isn't really connecting with anybody, including Charlotte in this movie. But I'm glad it was in there because at least you got a sense that there was, at least at some time, some humor in this gentleman. Yeah. I'm going to go over two more last scenes on this movie. One is the bed scene, Charlotte and Bob, and then the ending of the movie, which I briefly talked about earlier. I'll go into that a little bit more. But the bed scene is the one time in this movie where they skirt around being a little bit serious. Though there's that sort of barb by Charlotte when he says, you know, it gets easier. And she goes, oh, yeah, look at you.
Yes. It gets easier.
Oh, yeah? Look at you.
I mean, that's kind of a nasty thing to say, and they're supposed to have a decent bond by this point. You know, she could have found some other way of saying that, you know, or even like alluding to it, like, oh, really? You know, and give him a sly look, and he gives her a sly look, and he's like, well, it's supposed to get easier, you know? I mean, that would have been nice. It would have been more warming. And it would have allowed us to like Charlotte more, because frankly, I don't like Charlotte in this movie. I don't like Bob very much either, but he doesn't seem at least mean or backbiting or anything like that. So anyway, the scenes, it's okay. I mean, you know, there's some really good acting, I think. This is the best acting in the movie when she asks him if marriage gets easier.
What about marriage? Does that get easier?
That's hard.
Yeah, that's some good acting right there by Bill Murray. In this whole movie, that is the most poignant moment. And the way he hesitates and looks around, looks back at her, and you're just like, wow, boy. So as shallow as this movie is, that's the one moment. This is the one moment where you really truly feel the pain that Bob is going through. But even in this scene, they don't dive deep enough. This movie never dives deep enough. It's never this serious. But one thing about this scene that drives home the platonic aspect of this movie is, yeah, they're in bed, they're separated from each other, they're fully clothed, there's no hint of romance or love or a tryst or anything. And that makes the last scene in this movie not work. So let's go to that last scene. So right before the end of the last scene where they kiss, you know, you have them meeting outside of the hotel. And I was glad to see that he got rid of that woman who was trying to come on to him and walks over to Charlotte. But one of the problems I've got with the portrayal of Charlotte in this movie, and I don't think it's Scarlett Johansson's fault, I think it's Coppola's fault, is that Charlotte, even though she's going through sort of an existential crisis in her life, she's got this sort of passive look on her face as she walks up to Bob. And then when he responds to her, she again has the nervous laughter. So you just don't get much depth in her character. And then, yeah, of course, there's the sort of, okay, bye, nonchalant. And there's no chemistry. There's no electricity there. I mean, she just walks off. You know, doesn't seem to be troubled or bothered, which makes the ending kiss where she's tearing up, crying, not work. Where does it come from? Had she been hiding that the whole time? Because if that's what Coppola's doing, she's hiding the feelings inside. It doesn't work. You can't do that. Because I was surprised at the end where she's tearing up. In fact, I was surprised she let him kiss her. He has shown in that hotel scene, he showed maybe a little bit of interest, but it's also possible, it could easily be what I thought it was just him caring for her a little bit. That's the way it's been throughout this whole movie. You know, he's been the one who cares a little bit more. Gives nice expressions during karaoke, you know, in the bed scene. He has sort of a fondness look. Nothing romantic. And in the hotel when she's walking off, you know, he's got that look where, you know, he's thoughtful. So we get no hint of what's about to come. Okay, so the way that whole scene plays out, he walks up, she looks up, she's curious, surprised, but there's nothing there that says, "Oh, I'm so glad you found me," or "I love you," or "Oh my God, I was hoping we would have an intimate moment." So he hugs her, excuse me. And then while he's hugging her, she starts crying. We have no idea why she's crying. Did she need to let loose this whole time? Was there something there that wasn't shown to us by Coppola? I was surprised that she started crying. She seemed to be perfectly blithe at the hotel. There didn't seem to be one hint of longing in her face. She just walked off. So where did this come from? Then he backs off the hug. He sees that she's crying and he kisses her. Oh no, he says something in her ear. What does he say? I mean, here's the one time in this movie where we can actually hear the emotions that are needing to be said about something in the relationship that we weren't shown, or his feelings or her feelings, but he's whispering and we don't get to hear it. Why? Why don't we get to hear it? It's just weird. We want to know what he's saying. But just like the rest of this movie, we don't get to know the inner workings of the characters. So we don't get to know the inner workings during the most emotional scene in the movie. And we don't know why it's happening. We don't know what's going on. We don't know what he's saying. And then to top it all off, he kisses her. So there was something there the whole time with him that we didn't see. There was something there the whole time with her that we didn't see. All right, is this supposed to be profound? Is this supposed to be subtle? Is this Coppola's way of saying that everybody hides until the moment that they don't hide anymore? Well, that doesn't work in a movie, and it's not interesting. So we can't share in the joy at the end of this movie. I can't share in it. She seems to be relieved and happy and crying. He's walking backwards, and he seems to be free-spirited all of a sudden. But they didn't earn it. It's not earned in the movie. What, the commiseration over a couple of days of each other's loneliness is somehow exemplified or somehow sends them to a transcending moment? I mean, it just doesn't work. I don't get it. It's inscrutable. It's inscrutable. Although I will say that I really like the song right there at the end, Just Like Honey. Man, that's a good song. And Roxy Music's More Than This is in this movie. I like that. Brass in Pocket, and there's a couple other ones. On the sound, okay, I'm done with the movie. I'll just talk real quick about the soundtrack, and that are done with the acting and pacing and all that. There are 4 individual short soundtracks, original ones done on this movie, and then the rest of them, I think 12 or 15, are just regular songs that are used on the movie, and they're fine. Nothing to write home about on the musical score on this movie. But in those 8 categories, the other 7, that's fine. It's the only category that's fine on this movie. It's just fine. It's okay. Besides the acting, which is okay. So I guess the other 6 categories are just wretched. The story, the drama, the writing, the pacing, the characters, and the directing. Just simply so subpar, so inscrutable that it makes this movie a bore fest, a snooze fest. So that's why I'm going to have to give this movie 1 popcorn out of 10. As I said earlier, it doesn't work on any level. I don't know what Coppola was trying to get across in this movie, except for the obvious to desperate characters who are lost in the translation of a particular moment of their life are feeling the alienation in an alien culture and accentuating it, and are sort of latching onto each other's loneliness and commiserating a little bit, but it's not fleshed out, and there's no depth to the characters, so that you have no drama playing out, and it creates a sort of flat line of experience on this movie. Yeah, so that's what it is. I'll be very curious to hear what y'all have to say about it. Please let me know, and I'll look forward to your comments. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Bye now.